They reserve it for big shots, and then they sit in the back. Anybody can come up in the front. So hello, everyone. I'm Laura Tyson. I'm serving as the interim dean at the Haas School. I'm also the director of the Institute for Business and Social Impact. And actually, really, I know Margo for more than 20 years when I was originally dean here, and she and I became friends, and she was one of the early supporters of the Center for Responsible Business, and now the Institute for Business and Social Impact, a very deep connection to Berkeley. I'll tell you a little bit about her amazing experience as a leader. She is a 1968 alumna of Cal.
Still walking.
She was here on Friday night. She received the Berkeley Haas Lifetime Achievement Award at the Haas Gala. That award reflects career accomplishments. It reflects dedication and involvement with Haas, I've already talked about, and her stature as a model for students and alums. She attended Berkeley in the mid-1960s. Actually, I didn't realize until I saw the date. My husband was a graduated in 1969. So basically, you and he experienced the radical Berkeley, the Berkeley of the turbulent campus protests.
Yes, the police.
That's the backdrop. The tear gas.
Yeah, the tear gas,
right.
Arrests.
It was great. During that period of time, though, Margo started to think that she could change the world through business, through connecting to business, that was a force for change, and that by occupying an important position in the world of business, you could be a powerful force for change. So the next step for her was to go to Harvard Business School and get an MBA. That was 1970. How many women were in your class?
There were 27 out of 800.
27 out of 800. And frankly, even thinking as a young woman, I think I'll get an MBA from Harvard Business School. There were very few women even thinking that. There were no role models. There was no, right? How did you figure that out?
It came to me in a vision. No, the truth is, I was dying to get to New York from an early age. And so when people were thinking about junior year abroad, I said, junior year in New York.
Okay.
And I actually went to New York, to NYU, to the business school.
Right, okay.
And at NYU, everybody was talking about Harvard Business School.
Okay.
So I said,
all right, there you go.
Sounds interesting, you know. Why not?
There's a kind of why not attitude about all that goes through this whole story. So why not? Why not? That'll work for me. So from Harvard Business School, why not a career in finance? Well, at that time, just like Harvard Business School, there weren't a lot of women, role models, obvious directions in finance. So having decided you were going to do that, you ultimately landed a job at PaineWebber. We can talk a little bit about that experience. Went there to actually eventually become chairwoman and CEO. PaineWebber was subsequently bought UBS Global Asset Management. All of this is 30 years of your career, including things like running trading floors, okay? Being the first woman in running a trading floor, being the first woman who actually held major position in terms of research at a major Wall Street firm. So there are a number of firsts here in the world of finance we can talk about. Next stage of career was to essentially become an active member and helping to really create Acumen, which is a really interesting philanthropic organization, and I want to talk a lot about Acumen because I think a number of you will be interested. This is, again, if you go back to Margo's sense, I can solve the world's problems using business and finance. What Acumen is about is mobilizing philanthropic funds to fund sustainable business enterprises to address major social challenges in disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged nations around the world. So that's a consistency in Margo's career. She does believe that the MBA was part of the reason for her success, so she does appreciate the thinking skills that most of you are acquiring or have acquired here. But she also recognizes that besides the education, besides the credentials, besides her obvious commitment to hard work, there's always a dash of good luck. There's always a dash of good luck. So those are just some thoughts about Margo. She's a wonderful friend. I said on Friday night, for those people who wonder, can women achieve leadership success in a world they choose to inhabit, and can do that with a balance with their personal life? You just can read about Margo's life. So Margo is a model of combining personal life and business professional skills. And on Friday night, she had her sons there. She had her grandchildren there.
I have one right now.
Oh my goodness. All right. Fantastic. So she has kept her family absolutely together. So we are just delighted and honored to welcome Margo to us. And I guess we should start with, I've already answered some of these questions. Why did you choose your further education by pursuing an MBA? You've already mentioned that. So let's actually go right from your education to your employment. So there you are. You arrive on Wall Street. I assume.
Well, let's step back a second.
Absolutely.
I had to get there.
You had.
Right.
You mean to get to business school?
I had to get out of business school and get a job.
No, that's right. How did you get the job? I completely agree.
That's another story. And when I tell this, sometimes people say, "Well, what did you say?" The story is that at Harvard,
There's these little nooks around the halls, and they would have interviews. So you sign up. I'm sure it's the same here. You sign up and go to have an interview. Mm-hmm. And so you'd walk in, and periodically or frequently, they would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't hire women."
They would literally just say that. That was okay to say that.
Yeah.
We just don't hire women. Okay.
We just don't hire women. I said, "Oh, okay." So then you leave. And so I've had young women say, "Well, what did you say to them?" Nothing. I mean, it was just how things were. But I will tell you, if I can drift on my story, among the 800 men at Harvard, I actually married one. And he was like number 1 or 2 in our class.
Okay.
So when we would come home, he would sort through the mail. Maybe, no. And then he would say, "Oh, here's another credit card for you," for a gas company. So one day I was invited to go to a fancy restaurant in Boston by a consulting firm. Yes. So off I go with 2 men, and we have a very nice dinner. And they said, "Now, aren't you getting married to Bob Alexander?" Yeah, next month. Well, they say, "Here's why we invited you to dinner. We've sent him several letters and been unable to set up an appointment, and we thought if we told you about our company, you would help us introduce him to our company." So that was a bit of a disappointment.
I would say, and I hope he didn't go there.
I did not go there. Anyway, so getting a job wasn't the easiest thing. You think, gee, Harvard Business School, that would be a good thing. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I worked briefly at an accounting firm because I had accounting at Haas. Mm-hmm. And then through a connection from Harvard, I got a job as an analyst in an asset management company.
Okay.
And but that was a couple years after.
A couple years after.
Yeah.
You did not get a job initially in finance. That's interesting.
No, I didn't get a job at all.
Wow.
Not finance or anything. Mm-hmm. So things have changed happily in that respect.
Yes,
Yeah.
They have.
So I went to work as an analyst at an asset management company, and then I moved to an institutional brokerage firm where I was an
And
analyst.
is that where it was, when did you arrive at Payne Webber then? Was that?
Well, I went to a company that was just a small boutique that serviced institutions, equities, stocks for institutional clients. And that was named Mitchell Hutchins. And it was purchased
yeah.
by Payne Webber in the, I think, the early 80s. So basically, Payne Webber turned over its institutional equity business to Mitchell Hutchins, and I stayed there. And so I was with that combined organization for over 30 years.
Yeah, that's right. And as I said, moving up and doing a number of things there, the trading floor, the large asset management business, the research department, you were playing different roles as you moved up through the organization.
Which is unusual because a lot of those, as I'm sure you know, in these investment banking firms, you are a banker or you're a
Yes.
bond trader, or
Exactly.
that's how it is. So I did get a mix of management experience. I went from being a research analyst, kind of a little bit backdoor, and as it turned out, to becoming the research director, in that I was a very good writer. So the man who was research director said, would you get the supervisory analyst designation so that I could read other people's reports and restructure them and whatnot. So I was an analyst, but also a supervisory, an editor, really. And so I learned a lot about what other people were doing and how to write research. But anyway, I then sort of became like the assistant research director through that undescribed role, and then was made research director. And at that time, I was the youngest analyst. There were only maybe 3 women out of maybe 30. And when I got the job, of course, now I had all the records. I also found out I was the lowest paid.
Aha.
There you go. So you find out things along the way. And
Were you able to rectify that?
it worked out. It worked out.
So as you know, in that area, we do have the Center for EGAL, Equity, Gender, and Leadership. One of the things that we are doing is working with a lot of companies now are really doing serious analysis to identify pay gaps and then to actually rectify them. But you actually have to do research because if they've built up over time, maybe no intention was involved, but the point is they've built up over time. So you have to go and say, here they are, here's the amounts, let's change.
I had one of my first, before I went to Mitchell Hutchins, I was at another firm, an asset management. And when it came time for raises or bonuses, probably raises, my boss said, I am giving John Kornreich, I remember his name well, a raise of 10%. You know, he has 2 children and his wife doesn't work. But you and Bob both work, so I figure you don't need a raise.
You don't need a raise, yeah. That used to be.
And that was,
Right.
I said, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. But, you know, the things that you now think are unbelievable were, you know, flat out open.
Yeah, that's right. We don't hire women, and we don't give raises.
We don't pay them, but other than
we don't
that.
pay them if they have a husband to support them. We just work for free.
No maternity programs whatsoever.
Yeah. So there's been a lot that's happened, and you've actually helped lead the charge for what has happened. So before we go on to Acumen, I think because you told one on Friday night, you can choose which one. But so here you go into these organizations. There are not many women. There is this embedded set culture, an embedded set of ideas. You constantly have to challenge them. Can you sort of talk about so here you are with your male colleagues. How did this affect your relations with them? I mean, did it affect friendships? When you became a boss and you were over the trading floor, were there particular issues that you encountered because you were a woman?
I think in the research analyst group, that was not such a big issue. They're very,
Okay.
each of these, whether they're traders, salesmen, analysts, bankers, they all seem to have personality profiles that are quite different. And the research analysts are sort of a more academic. Student-oriented kind of personality. And I don't think that they were particularly one way or the other relative to women or men. Moving into the trading world.
Trading floor is a different thing.
Very different kind of thing. And
Right.
that was, when I was a co-head, so the man who was head of trading, he and I became co-heads of research, sales, and trading for the institutional equity business. And the traders were not happy. And I got a very cold shoulder. And a woman who did work on the trading floor came to me and said, you know what? Don't feel bad. They're being teased by all the other traders at other firms. They pick up their phone and they hear, oh, I hear you're working for a girl. And they would be so embarrassed and et cetera, et cetera. So, but that sort of eased. I got along with them fine. And I was saying to Laura earlier, one of the things that I actually think women can have an advantage in dealing with people. I think women are generally more open, more inclusive, and warmer. I mean, you know that many men have relationships with their best buddies and go play. I love this story about the man who comes home after playing golf and his wife says, oh, I'm so upset about the divorce. And the man says, what divorce? He says, you've been playing golf for 6 hours. He didn't mention that they're getting a divorce. It's just that a lot of personal matters don't get shared. And I think that women are used to conversations, used to openness. And I found it very easy in most cases. You had to kind of break it down a little bit, but I got along with the traders fine after a pretty short period of time. And also, I was able to communicate with them why we're going to do things different and to link that to why they should care. How are we going to change, status quo? I've always got involved with an assessment of the new business I took over, questioning the status quo, trying to figure out how we can do things better, and communicating to the people, to the workers. Here's what I've learned about our group. Here's what we need to do better. Here's how we're going to do it. And, not always saying it so, well, probably I did say it pretty bluntly. It will improve our bonus pool. So linking up the broader goals with the individual performance and what that would do in terms of the firm, the team, the individual.
Great, that's great. Would you say in that, since that gets to your leadership style, questioning the status quo, basically being, I would say the words I've heard from our discussions are, you question the way it's done, you then try to really engage people directly in how it will work for them to make these changes. So there's a kind of engagement.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you would say, thinking about your leadership both in the financial world and then in Acumen, that you would say are lessons for aspiring leaders?
Can I come back another day? That's a complicated question.
It is a complicated question. It is a complicated question. And I mean,
you know what, I think a really important dimension of that is, and I brought this up Friday night, the word nice sounds like, who wants to be nice? But I was nice. And I think that people, they trusted me. They did not think that it was only about me.
Right.
I told the story that on my 25th anniversary, I got a nice leather book full of letters, and virtually everyone thanked me for my support of them. and that I had been
Right.
their mentor.
This is-
So connecting the feeling that I wanted them to do well, that's what people want from their bosses. They want somebody to care about how they're doing. And when I fired people, which I fired a lot of people, it's necessary.
The financial services world is very volatile too, so
Yeah.
yes, right.
But I had read an article about the men who ran Bell Labs. I forget their names now.
I don't
But
remember
anyway.
either, but it has a great reputation.
Anyway, one of the things that was said is that they appreciated that that chair at Bell Labs was one of the most fortuitous platforms that any engineer could have.
Could ever have, right?
And I thought that about where I worked. I said, you know, the trading desk, the research analyst, this is a great place for them. They can make a lot of money. They can be involved with energetic other people, et cetera, et cetera. If a person cannot or will not perform, then they shouldn't be there. I should not leave somebody out who could take that seat and do better. So, you know, in fact, one of my friends said, when we had your 25-year reunion, I was amazed how many people were there you had fired. But they didn't take it personally. It would be kind of, and in those days, it was easier to do some terminations than these days. You could say to somebody, come on in, let's talk about this. Now, I think in 2 months, you're going to come in and tell me that you have a new job, and then we will part ways. And no fuss, no muss, no big deal. And, you know, as you know, the world changed. But there were more human ways you could deal with certain problems.
So I don't think you have to come back with an answer to leadership. I think you've given us a lot there. I think the issue of engaging. I mean, I used to when I was playing around with speeches for a while about what it meant to be CEO. So the E you can do engaging, you can do ethical, you can do empathetic, you can do enthusiastic. So much of leadership is really about engaging the people that are part of your team. Why does anybody want to follow you? That was one of my colleagues used to say at London Business School. Think about it more from the follower's point of view, and you'll be a good leader. So, and then the empathy, obviously, which you're talking about. So, and then I also think it is confidence without attitude, because if you are a kind of imperial leader, so that basically your point is I'm the one in charge and I will do it more in a command and control way. First of all, in financial services firms, it's not really going to work. It's not really going to work. You've got to have the team. The team is doing the.
Well,
right?
there was always a lot of fluidity.
Yeah.
So if someone didn't want a job, if they were a high talent performer, they can get another job. In fact, a big part of your job was keeping your people.
That's right. Why would they stay with you?
Making them want to be part of that. And I did deliberate things. My husband was a great partner in that, because I'd have dinners or a barbecue or whatever. And I would say, now here are the 4 wives I want you to focus on. Because I wanted them to see that we were, you know, we're not a family. We're not working as a family, but there is a collegiality and a community that's positive. So I would engage the wives. I would take them out to dinner, with the husbands, and make it a comfortable place.
Engage, have them be part of the team as well as part of the family. Have a community. Let's say community. Part of the community. Acumen, because I do want to have a couple questions on Acumen, and I also want to give the students some time to ask questions. So why don't you describe Acumen? I gave a kind of, 2-sentence thing, but it's unique. It's unique.
Well, Acumen, I met the woman who founded it, Jacqueline Novogratz. I met her when she was just getting started, and I was introduced to her by a friend. she was coming out of Rockefeller.
Rockefeller.
And she explained Acumen, and I really had no idea what she was talking about. And I had a friend who was active in nonprofits, and I said, come and I want you to meet this woman because what she's describing. So we went and had lunch. It was Pam Flaherty. And after lunch, Pam said, you know, she's amazing, but I don't get it. So the language of what she was trying to talk about was not well defined.
Yeah, it's a new language, actually. It's a new language.
Yeah. And
Honestly.
the idea of using business tools for social change was not exactly understood. Using capital in a different way. I mean, you can look at, we all know that there's startup capital and there's, you know, different layers of capital as the firms mature. There was no capital availability for low-income people, businesses serving poor people with local entrepreneurs. Now, we had to do a lot of figuring out, you know, what kind of entrepreneur, what kind of businesses, et cetera. But there was no source of capital to support those businesses. So it became, early on, we talked about venture capital for the poor, but it all evolved. And she did not have a full-blown story when she started. And she has been superb at evolving. So our objective was to serve the poor. And the normal kind of role in rich countries is to tell those people what they need. And we will build, we will deliver, et cetera. No.
So her focus was always global in the sense that to serve the poor, she was looking to places like India or Pakistan, or right. She was looking around the world.
Yes. And only in the last 2 or 3 years have we launched a U.S. version.
Okay.
So we were looking to provide the goods and services that poor people want and need. And we made some mistakes. That, you know, we met a man who's Dr. Green, who said, I can build a hearing aid for $50 that will rival a $5,000, which seemed unlikely. But we said, wow, what a great technology to apply. Well, you know what? He did it. And we were involved with Dr. Reddy's pharmaceutical in India who helped. Well, guess what? Nobody in India really cares about deafness. Blindness, you die from blindness because you can't work, you extract from the social fabric, you don't eat. And hearing is a very different thing. There's no audiologists. I mean, so we didn't understand, and had to, the local requirements. And so it's been an evolving thing.
But the basic model is to find entrepreneurs with innovative approaches, oftentimes with technology as part of the approach, but not always.
Technology is really sort of the least important variable.
Least important, okay.
The most, and if Jacqueline were here, she would say this, what we have found about our successes over time is the most important variable is the character of the entrepreneur.
Of the entrepreneur, okay.
They are operating in very difficult circumstances. There's enormous amount of corruption. And if these people don't stand up in an honest, ethical way, you know, we'll get away from them. But, you know, I think being an entrepreneur is hard work anywhere. But imagine in a place where there's no electricity, the water is intermittent, the workforce is uneducated. So these people are trying to build a business.
And there's corruption around you trying to extract from you as you're building.
So all of the resources that you would pull together as an entrepreneur to build an organization, all those are somewhat rickety to start with.
Well, it's a great organization, and it has been an early leader in trying to figure out modalities to mobilize finance from the primarily from the philanthropic developed world to finance these kinds of endeavors. So it's so I can see the motivation for that work, and you stayed involved with that work.
Since the beginning. I was the chair for 9 years of the first decade. And I'm still on the board. I had to go off for, I think, 3 years for governance reasons. But I'm, along with Haas, Acumen and Haas are enormous sources of pride.
Oh, well, that's great. We are honored to be there with you and with Acumen. And I was telling Margo before we came out, we have many things at Haas already in what I would call the broad impact finance area. We have socially responsible investing in publicly traded companies. We have a couple of courses which allow, one course which now advises impact investing firms on how to do their organizations. I mean, Acumen could be Acumen could be giving advice, but we could also be giving advice. We have some prize competitions with funding for students to come up with ideas, or with faculty to come up with ideas. So there's a lot. This is an area I know that's very near and dear to our students. I already said to Margo that I'm appointing her as my informal advisor on this set of issues.
Love it,
so,
love it.
Yeah, you can bring
Also
Acumen
blockchain.
together with us.
Also blockchain.
Well, blockchain is another because we did at Haas. We are one of 17 universities in the world to get a grant from an organization called Ripple. It's a for-profit firm in the blockchain space. But part of the agenda that they've laid out for us is blockchain applications for good, for economic development, for financial inclusion. So there's a way to absolutely link, as both of us continue to acquire knowledge and understanding of blockchain and crypto. Student always. We're student always in the blockchain area, I would say for sure. All right, I want to make sure there are time for some questions.
Could I add one thing, though?
Absolutely.
And I know you have heard me, I am very cautious about this use of the word of impact investing.
Yes, that's why I call it something else. Right?
Yes, which I'm glad you are, because when we started this, I think Jacqueline and maybe one other organization was trying to do this. We didn't call it impact then. We called it patient capital, but we were always focused on how do we measure
Impact.
what happens to the people. And in the last few years, this has become a big business.
Yes.
Billions of dollars have flowed in.
This is true.
And there are lots of people who say, we can generate returns equal to any other investments and social good.
Right.
I don't believe it. And I think that it's an issue to be very sensitive and cautious about, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, if you want higher returns, you are unlikely to be giving the lowest cost alternative to the customers. And we stand with the poor, and our people do not, we expect a social return and not financial, although we're getting into some financial return issues with solar, et cetera.
So I think that's a really interesting point, and I would urge all of you who are interested in this space. This is an ongoing debate about whether can you have financial return with impact? Can you have financial return which is below the market return with impact? There is a lot of evidence that actually in publicly traded companies, what's happened is that impact has been combined with sustainability or long-term. So when Larry Fink talks about sustainable investing and the need that every publicly traded company, in order to maintain its long-term license to operate, needs to think about its return to society, he's thinking it's a return to society which actually is long-term, which will affect their financial return. So he's actually going in that direction. Whereas that's why it's such a messy space, because impact investing for some really is actually investing without the financial return just for the impact. Philanthropic investing can be impact investing,
Yeah.
or philanthropic investing with some return, but not the market return. So I think it's a really exciting space, but the issue is that certain kinds of impact may not bring along the same financial return as other kinds. And I mean, basically what you might say is the market, if there are unaddressed problems out there in the financials, in our world, some of them may be unaddressed because they actually don't generate the financial impact, but they should be addressed anyway.
Well,
we need to do that.
This goes back to 1968 for me, is that somehow I decided, figured out that corporations hire people, train people, pay people. Corporations destroy the environment, whatever they want to do. And that the social problems of the country are not just for the government to solve.
No.
And that corporations have the levers. They can do it like this. They can make that decision to improve the benefit. It used to be, in the old days, the corporations worked for employees, customers, and shareholders.
Right.
And somehow in the early 80s,
We had a number of court decisions in the United States in particular, yes. Right.
And somehow in the 80s, that changed. And it became shareholders. And I disagree with that point of view. And I disagree, these are giant, powerful organizations that should not operate solely for the shareholder returns.
I completely agree. And there are probably some people in this room who are thinking about alternative forms like B Corps, or maybe some, there are lots of students' interest in alternative forms of organization, which would actually reflect that it's not just about shareholders. We did have in the United States, we moved dramatically in the United States, partly because of a series of court decisions, and partly because I have to confess my profession, economists, who basically argued very forcefully that basically the market would be efficient, and that if the firm was operating in the interest of its shareholders, that would drive it to efficiency, and that would benefit everyone. And that just was, I think we're rethinking seriously that assumptions. There's many more assumptions now about stakeholders, not shareholders. And the Haas student community is very interested in that, and the centers are very interested in that. All right, come on, some questions, because I don't want to hog the floor here. And Margo is a real resource for all of us.
Should I tell them about working on a trading floor?
You can tell them about that. You can tell them about the entertainment that occurred on the trading floor. That's a wonderful
People
story.
love this.
Yes.
Just to give you a sense of what it was like to work on a trading floor back in the dark ages, it was common that another firm would send a gift to your traders. Sometimes it would be lunch, but their favorite was a stripper. Yeah. So the stripper would come while the guys are on the phone trading, and the stripper would come we had these amphitheaters, how trading desks are set up, and the young woman would bring her boombox, play, and I was teased by calling it a boombox of how long ago that was, but it was a boombox. So I said to my partner, Charlie, this is ridiculous, and it's wrong. This is in the late 80s, I guess?
Late 80s. So you see, it's not, late 80s. Wow.
So we put out a memo. No more strippers.
You should have a copy of that memo somewhere to put on a wall.
Yeah,
No more strippers.
As I say, I wanted to withhold high standards. So about a week later, we hear the music, and Charlie and I were nearby, and look out, and there's, of course, we ran out, he grabs a boombox, I collect her clothes, and we escort her out. And that was the last of our strippers. And I always say about this story, is that I want to be remembered for having high standards. No naked people during the work hours in the workspace.
lest all of you think that it's just about Wall Street and financial services, a few months ago, as one of the earlier events of EGAL, the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership, I had a woman named Magdalena Jetzel, and Magdalena told almost exactly the same kind of story. Now, she didn't have, so she was trained as a software engineer, one of the very few women at that time in that setting, and she was one of the major salespeople at a very large semiconductor firm, and they would have the same thing. And of course, she didn't have a lot, she basically was not in a position of power to influence it, but she actually did go to the CEO at the time, who actually was on the cover of many magazines about his flirtatious nature. Now, actually, such a person would be subject to considerations of sexual assault. But at the time, it was like a positive story. Okay, here's a big flirt who's also the CEO of a big company. And she did get it stopped, but she said it was like really, really hard for her to do because she's like a junior engineer, but she was like one of the best salespersons. She was making the biggest sales. So she went in and said, I don't want this at the sales celebrations anymore. This makes me feel really bad. So she had an interesting, you talked about being nice. She had an interesting phrase, which I think is a bit about, she said, I've been described as humbitious, meaning the combination of very ambitious, but also humble. That somehow or other, I don't come across as kind of the power at the top leading. I'm humble, but I'm very ambitious, and I will be ambitious. That's accepted. And your story reminded me of that word. It reminded me of that
Well,
word.
and I think, when a person's very young, they might think, if you're the boss, you're the boss. You get to, and we used to have, a phrase which I'm sure you've heard, if you say to somebody, would you do that? And they say, you are not the boss of me. But the fact is, bosses don't have that latitude, or most bosses, to order people around. It's not,
No.
certainly not in my experience, effective or a good way to live your life. Oh, surely there's some question. I thought if I filled it up with
Here
the
you go.
strippers.
All right,
Okay,
so
now
see,
we go,
normally
yeah.
you can go over, but let's start here. We'll just go here, 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 here. Go for it.
Sure. So you were mentioning that Acumen has recently moved to more domestic work. So I was wondering kind of what Acumen's balance is of international and domestic relations.
It's almost all international. We only started, there's a young woman named Catherine Casey who had worked at Acumen for about 10 years. And the board and Jacqueline said, okay, you want to do this, do the research. Does our model apply? And you have to raise $3 million to get started. So we started about 2 years ago. So I would say there's only 5, 6, and they're working on food, financial inclusiveness, I think training.
Training.
But there's a San Francisco office. In fact, we had a table of the Acumen people at our event on Friday night.
Yep. Yeah. So we should make sure that we get some presentations coming over here for the what's going on.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Yeah, no, I like that idea a lot. Okay, there was one back there, and then we'll go over here.
Yeah, please use the microphones for asking questions.
Oh, yeah, if we use a microphone, you get to be recorded for other people listening.
Hi, first, thanks for coming today. My question is regarding the business model of Acumen. What are the biggest challenges you see in identifying successful social entrepreneurs, in addition to regular entrepreneurs?
Yeah, what are the defining characteristics you're looking for? Yeah.
Well, it's rather hard to say character. We have a very active training program, fellowship
We do.
work.
Great
And-
online courses. You have
we
great
have-
online training capabilities.
We have, I wish I knew the numbers offhand. We have online courses, but we have fellowship programs, and we have that are global fellows, and we also have regional fellows. So and then sometimes we fund people who come out of that. it's like any other quest for talent, of getting a sense of the person, a sense of their values. When you get involved in hiring people, you're not always right, but you get a feeling for what is it that motivates this person. Do they have ethical standards? And I would say we do not have a magic box. But the other thing is when you find out you were wrong, we don't sit around. We don't say, well, the project's going pretty well, we can bend here. No, we're done.
Over here, there were a couple of hands up over here. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I'm a second year full-time MBA. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I have found that a lot of organizations in the social impact space are trying to figure out how to measure impact. It's something that they struggle with, and I think Acumen does a great job of that. So I was wondering if you could speak to kind of how you came about that and how you think about that more broadly in the space of social impact.
Thank you. Metrics are critical. In fact, one of the first reasons I got involved with Acumen is Jacqueline was talking about, and we're going to measure impact. And of course, I had realized at that point that we have so many social organizations that have no measurement. These are, regular nonprofits all over the United States. And a lot of them exist because of history and social issues. And I was very keen to see the idea that metrics. We started, it's been a real up and down. And I think that we were the earliest to just even get going on the language. What is a full-time equivalent? What is an invested capital? And that was put together under, I'm missing the name of the organization that kind of does that. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we started again and gave it to one of our senior people named Sasha Dichter.
Oh, Sasha. Yeah.
And he started and led lean data. And the idea was, random trials. Is that the right
Yes,
phrase?
random control.
Are
Random
very
control
expensive.
experiments. They're very expensive.
Very expensive, big deal. What could you do that was quick and effective? And it was all the time we're just coming along with cell phones. So basically, we do cell phone surveys and we train people. They're not our employees. They become, hired
They're outside
people.
experts to do the surveys and evaluation.
We do the evaluation.
They collect the data.
They collect the data.
They collect the data.
So we have, in all these poor places,
Yeah.
these people have phones. And so we ask them, what do you like? What do you not like? It's not complicated things. And then using different algorithms and statistical analysis, et cetera, analyze how people feel about the product they received. And it'll include, was it clear how to use it? Was there backup in maintenance? Was the product of a good quality? Did it impact their lives? And they'll tell you exactly. And so we'll take, we can have 5 companies that are all involved in training. And we can analyze them on 6 different dimensions and see how they compare to each other. And then we go back to the management and say, you're falling down on this element. So we use it as a tool to improve the performance of the companies and to understand what the customers feel. Now, this is a big new project for us. We're spinning it out because while we were developing this, we worked in tandem with some other companies. We did a lot of work for Skoll. And at a certain point, there were some other impact investors saying, we like your methodology, but we feel a little hesitant about letting Acumen have access to all of our data. So the board decided to spin it out, which is, we're in process of doing
Oh,
that.
is that right? Oh, okay.
Because
Didn't know that.
we're keen on there being,
That's great.
like anything else, there's a lot of people trying to work on how do we measure. And you'd like to be able to have some kind of standard that people can say, you know what, this is a good investment, or it turned out to be a good investment. It did have the impact. I believe, because of my mutual fund background, that at some point we should go to the SEC and say, you have all these funds saying that we're impact investors.
They're all impact investors, right?
And we should have a standard that they have to measure up to.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, in the publicly traded equities field, so I'm part of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and that is trying to do the same thing for basically take a publicly traded company. Every company that cares about this has various ESG, corporate social responsibility metrics they use. They're not in any way standardized. Sometimes they're like at the bottom of managers and directors statement in a footnote. So we've actually got to standardize the metrics, and ultimately, because otherwise investors can't decide within a sector who are the responsible players on the metrics they care about. So you're saying the same thing is going to happen in this other area of impact. Would be fantastic. Actually, really, really.
I'm very excited about it.
So, and I think we should definitely follow this. I know
It'd be fun to have Sasha come.
Yeah, it would be fun to have Sasha come. Okay, so I think we are up to our time, actually.
no.
In any event, yes. And Margo has been so generous with her time because she was here on Friday night and she did a wonderful presentation at the gala, and she was with us here today. This is my last event as the interim dean speakers series. So I am very delighted that actually I could host Margo, because she was one of the first friends that I made when I was originally the dean. And so to do this again now is very meaningful to me. All right. Take care, everybody. Take care. Great. That's really interesting about